Hello, this is the RPG Crawler and welcome to another review. This is effectively part 2 of a 2-part look at the new, as of this recording, Class of Heroes Remasters. The last one was Class of Heroes Anniversary Edition, and this review will be looking at Class of Heroes 2G Remaster. They are both available on certain consoles as a complete edition as well as separately on the PC through Steam. Sequel to Class of Heroes 2 was initially released in Japan on the PlayStation Portable, although it was later localized for the West in a version for the PlayStation 3, called Class of Heroes 2G. The new remastered version was developed and published by Acquire, which has now been localized and brought to the West by P-Cube, who were kind enough to send me a review copy. While it is a remaster, I have very limited experience with Class of Heroes 2, unlike the original, so I will mostly be covering it as a game that is new to me. Like its predecessor, Class of Heroes 2G is a first-person, grid-based, party-based dungeon crawler in the vein of the old Wizardry series. Unlike the first entry in the series, it diverges quite a bit more from the standard set of Wizardry classes and indeed makes more of a case for it being its own series, even if a great deal of the gameplay has been preserved. While the playable races are much the same, the classes diverge quite a bit, as do some of the monsters and items. In terms of the plot, you play a group of new students entering Crostini Academy, a school for adventurers. Similar to the first game, you will go through a series of orientations before being sent out into the world upon a series of quests, which is how the students advance. Along the way, you will be drawn into a deepening quest in which you encounter other sister schools, interact with their faculty and students, all the while venturing into ruins and dungeons which conceal a greater conspiracy set to start a magical war. Upon starting Class of Heroes 2G, you are drawn through an orientation section and made to create your own characters for your party. I mean, you don't have to, but you can't play the game without them, so there's that. This time, Crostini Academy serves as the main hub, although the two related academies, Panini and Bruschetta, can also serve as hubs in and of themselves when you uncover them. While much of the resources and facilities remain the same amongst the various academies this time, they also serve as a gateway to certain classes, with advanced classes being available only in their respective academies. I believe Panini does magical and Bruschetta does... Well, I think Panini does the martial classes, Bruschetta does the magical. I could be wrong about that, I could have them backwards. Anyway, once again, the campus serves as a sort of town area. You have the dormitory, which serves the purpose of the inn, where you can organize your party, rest your characters, and access storage. There's also a report option where you may check in with any quest that can take you to that area. Unlike the first Class of Heroes, interacting with NPCs in an area outside of a quest is actually much more rare, so there's very little use for the report function in a lot of these places. The store allows you to buy, sell, and uncurse items. The need to identify items has been removed from Class of Heroes 2G. Similar to the first entry into the series, most towns have a very limited amount of stock. The laboratory is where you can perform alchemy and review alchemical recipes, similar to the first game. You can use alchemy to craft new equipment that you find parts of throughout the game. In fact, this may be your primary source of gear besides random drops, and due to the limited stock in town, is pretty much the only way to reliably customize your gear loadout. Similar to the original, you start with a certain number of recipes already unlocked. You may purchase more recipes in stores, but you don't really require them, as you can find them either through trial and error or looking them up online, just like in the first game. The infirmary allows you to treat characters for status ailments such as paralysis and death, while you can also discharge and retrieve a patient if you would like to deal with those using your own character spells. You may also donate money to the infirmary for experience gain. Again, character death has 2 steps. You may attempt to revive a dead character, which is a chance to reduce them to ash instead. You may have one last chance to revive a character from its ash. If that fails, then they are lost forever, or at least until you reload the game. The library is where you may pick up quests from the bulletin board, as well as review records such as enemies, stats, and items collected through the yearbook. The office is where you may organize your party, enroll new characters, browse the current character roster, change the character's class, as well as expel them. Gone is the need to use hypnosis to change alignment. Rather, there are limited numbers of fruits available that can change a character's alignment for you from good to evil. Finally, the Gates option allows you to explore connected dungeons, view the world map, as well as resume parties that are out and about in a dungeon or stationed in another town. This time around, the world map is grayed out until you've explored the area. Character creation in Class of Heroes 2G is very similar to that of the original. Each time you try to create a character, you're given a number of bonus points, which you may then generate, which are generated randomly, and which you may then distribute amongst your characters' various ability scores. It's randomized similarly to the first game, in that they basically explode upwards, with it being very easy to generate a small number of bonus points, And then if you generate towards the maximum of that range, all of a sudden a new entire range is rolled and then added to the original total. Characters have a name, a gender, an alignment, and a major, with the major representing the character's class. Ability scores are the same as in the original, being strength, wisdom, faith, vitality, agility, and luck. Each major has a minimum requirement in order to qualify for it, and some races may qualify for those far more easily due to their base stat layout. Beyond race and stat layout, your majors may also be limited, since Crostini only allows for the basic majors, while more advanced and specialized majors require you to journey into one of the sister schools. Interestingly enough, the specialized majors tend to be all locked behind one individual race, so for instance only fairies may be sages, only gnomes may be alchemists, and so forth. Once more, the playable races include elf, human, dwarf, gnome, kulaz, fairy, felper, bahamut, diablos, and celestia. The basic majors include common, which is kind of like a generalized student, fighter, monk, mage, ranger, puppeteer, swordsman, ninja, and idol. Aside from a few of these, these are actually a fair departure from the classes available in the original. At least in this one, the class's general weapons, style, magic type, and skills are summarized on the selection screen. Another improvement is that each class and race combination also has its own special portrait, reducing the amount of repetition in the character view. Similarly to the first game, there's also an affinity stat that affects the party's makeup and alignments, and affects your overall stat progression. It can be affected, or it can be raised during doing party skills and attacks in game, which helps them work together. The bulk of the game is, of course, the dungeon crawl. This time, each town, school, and settlement is linked by a set of explorable maps, ranging from wilderness to ruins to dungeons. Unlike the first game, these are static and not selected from a random pool. Rather, each particular region has its own set map. Multiple maps may connect to the same base map, depending on where you exit, which can provide a sort of branching exploration style. All of them, however, are presented in the same first-person, grid-based dungeon crawler style that the first game had. The characters are arranged on either side of the screen, and you may view the map provided that you have purchased one. And just because you've purchased a map for a particular region doesn't mean it's automatically filled in. You still have to explore. You don't keep track of it until you buy the map. Individual tiles may contain traps, which may contain automatic move portions. They may contain certain things like spinner tiles and so forth. As well as the icons for different sorts of exits, you can tell where you're going to enter a town or another map just based on the floating icon on the actual view of the map. The classic orb that allows you to warp back to Crostini Academy is there in some maps, as well as question marks depicting events, cross swords depicting static encounters, and treasure chests depicting, of course, treasure chests. In the upper right is your morale or tension gauge, which once again can be used to execute various party attacks. It accrues after each successful action in battle. Once you enter a battle, you can enter each character's intended action for that turn. A character can fight, defend, use an item, cast a spell, as well as attempt to flee. At certain levels, other active skills may be unlocked, which can be added to the selection menu. For instance, a ranger can hide or even try to rob, a fighter may attempt a fierce attack, and so forth. Once all the actions have been inputted, combat then proceeds automatically until the next round, just selecting on an initiative order. Enemies may have certain elemental resistances and weaknesses, including resistances and weaknesses to certain weapons, and this can be required to handle certain enemies easily. Once you are victorious, you get a certain amount of experience, a smattering of crafting drops, and potentially other randomized drops depending on what you've just killed, and you also may encounter a treasure chest. Treasure chests may be inspected for traps, after which they may be unlocked via spell or have the traps disarmed by an appropriate rogue-type class. Like the first game, monsters are not necessarily identified as soon as you encounter them and may simply be a grayed out silhouette. You can still fight them as normal. It just prevents you from utilizing your knowledge of their potential resistances and immunities unless you take a blind guess and are right. They may become clear and identified as the fights go on, with higher level characters tending to identify monsters more readily. And again, that's basically the core of the game. You enter your dungeon, explore, go a little bit further each time, pick up various items and loot from combat to either increase your character's overall gear or turn into various quests. You accept more quests, rinse, and repeat. It's a very basic sort of game, but one which can provide much enjoyment for the kind of person that just enjoys this sort of dungeon crawl. I can't particularly comment on the translation quality since I, as I've said, did not have a great deal of experience with the initial release of the Class of Heroes 2G. I will say that it retains some sort of clear and cutesy art style of the first one, reminding me something of almost like Entry and Odyssey. In fact, a lot of the enemy types you encounter in Class of Heroes 2G actually seem to appear in some of the entries in the Entry and Odyssey series. I don't know whether it's because they both have the same root in the old Wizardry series, whether there's some sort of connection with the development back in the day. I know they were both published by Atlas back in the day, or whether they were just common translations for creatures and tropes more widespread in Japan. All in all, I have a hard time determining how much of the game was actually improved for the remaster due to its release as a 2G version on the PS3. I have to assume that a lot of the graphics are of similar quality as well as the music. I will note that at least one of the schools I encountered was kind of bugged in terms of the dormitory menu. I'm not sure if it's going to make it into the game's release or if it's going to be patched out shortly thereafter, but it was confusing when I encountered it. Compared to Class of Heroes, one of the array of classes, just with the array of classes and the fact that it handles a few things a bit more distinct from the Wizardry series that I saw as such a heavy inspiration of the first game, this very much feels like its own series at this point rather than just a rip-off or a spin-off. While map exploration is very similar, the lack of randomization makes for a more straightforward style of exploring the world. I like how the various regions have linked maps that can connect from settlement to settlement, which gives a real sense of geography in terms of actual exploration. While the combat is largely the same, I do enjoy the fact that you no longer have to identify things as well. Minor quality of life fixes like this make for a general improvement of the game overall. Compared to the first one in gameplay as well as in story, I found that the quests in Class of Heroes 2 are a little bit more distributed amongst the various settlements and schools, with a little bit more of a nebulous storyline, at least until you advance a considerable time into the game. Similarly, the way that many of the quests require certain drops from creatures made the overall experience seem a little bit more grindy. Now, for those who enjoy this sort of game, that's actually probably not too much of a problem, since that's part and parcel of the main gameplay. Also, it may just be me, but I found the NPCs that you interact with a little bit more obnoxious in Class of Heroes 2G, and I'm not sure if that's simply a translation issue or whether the characters are genuinely more grating overall. This is certainly just a personal preference of mine, however, so be it as you will. The nebulous nature of the overall main quest, combined with the lack of indication on where certain things are, led to a lot of wandering around for me in this particular game. Now, this lack of indication is more in terms of how regions connect to one another. You will be told to go to a certain area or to retrieve something from a certain zone, but you may not be told where that area is compared to anywhere else. If you have a map external to the game itself, this becomes way less of a problem. I found myself on several occasions wondering whether I was even exploring the right area due to the branching nature of the regions involved. The game itself seems to be somewhat shorter, and I've seen indications online where you can finish the main quest in under 30 hours. That's an extremely short duration for a dungeon crawler such as this. However, I think part of the reason for that is that the overall scale of power level between creatures of various regions only increases at a smooth and gradual rate, like a surprisingly smooth one. So that if you do have a period such as I did where you're exploring what is essentially the wrong way, going back to the prior area where you should have explored just lets you blast through that area with your new levels of gear very quickly. I actually think that's beneficial to this sort of game design for a game like this. I am happy to see that there was not that much in the way of brick walls or some difficulty adjustments between areas, although if you watch my playthrough later, and it will be up later, I don't know for everybody, but at least for the patrons it'll be up. Yeah, I did actually get stuck, but that was more me being me and not the game's fault. I played this game using a controller, and quite frankly, I'm rather pleased to say that it seems well done. I don't have any complaints about the overall port of this from console mechanics, aside from that one bug that dealt with a dormitory in another school. The graphics were clear, the music was interesting, in many cases quite catchy, and the controls were, while admittedly not as important for a turn-based menu-based game like this, rather smooth and intuitive to use. As a port, it's fine, and that's more than I can say about a number of ports from console games I've seen in recent years. I would say that gameplay in Class of Heroes 2G is objectively better in many instances than its predecessor, Class of Heroes. Not that Class of Heroes 1 was bad, simply that it's been improved in many minor ways for the sequel. In terms of plot, I'm still not entirely sure. I think, I want to say I kind of preferred the plot in the way that it was paced in the first game. All in all, however, it makes an exceptional companion game to the first one. If you haven't played it already, I'm not so sure that it's a necessary purchase if you already got a copy of the original Class of Heroes 2G back on the PlayStation 3 or the Vita or something. However, picking both of them up as a complete edition version or simply getting them available on the PC is certainly worthwhile if you're a fan of the genre and you haven't played them before. If you have played them before, or if you don't particularly like dungeon crawlers such as this, it's probably not going to change your mind in that regard. Furthermore, if you prefer a more hardcore dungeon crawler, I'm not sure if this fits the bill. It's not casual, just like the first one. It's not casual, but it is firmly on the easier side in terms of wizardry-like dungeon crawlers. And that may be a selling point for some people, and for some people not. On that note, I think I am going to wrap it up here. I actually very much enjoyed these two games. This has been the RPG Crawler with my look at Class of Heroes 2G Remastered. As always, I will put links to where you can pick them up in the description below. If you like what you've seen, remember to leave a like, comment on your feedback, and subscribe for more RPG content. Until next time, take care and goodbye.
And if you are still watching, I would like to take the opportunity to thank my supporters, the top tiers of which are listed on the screen, without whose support I would not have been able to offer the variety of content that I have on this channel throughout the years. If you're feeling particularly generous and would like to join them, you can support the channel. There are a variety of options to do so. I have a Patreon, a Subscribestar, as well as channel memberships enabled. If you are not in a position to contribute, simply leaving a like, a comment, or sharing my videos are all wonderful ways to help the channel grow without spending a dime, and are all greatly appreciated.